This is Greg Troutwine with Maritime Reporter TV, and we're here with Knut Ørbeck-Nilssen, CEO Maritime, DNV GL. And Knut, thank you very much for taking your time to join us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
New rules enter force, and they cost ship owners money. What has DNV GL done along the way that is helping to make the transition of new technology on ships more seamless for a ship owner?
Yeah, so what you are pointing to is the introduction of the treatment systems on board. And as you say, it's a big challenge for the ship owners that this comes at a time when the financial situation is strained for a lot of the players. What we have done specifically is naturally work with the manufacturers of these systems to try and help them to find a good path to have their systems approved. And as you know, there are some different schemes in place, and we are now, as we speak, end of 2016, working very closely now to have more systems approved by the US Coast Guard, because that is holding back a lot of the ship owners from investing in these systems. Because naturally it would be beneficial to also have systems that are approved by the US Coast Guard to access the American markets.
DNV GL is a technical resource for a lot of companies. Do you see increased dependence on DNV GL and classification in general to help vessel owners keep abreast of emerging rules and technologies?
Yeah, so I think what you are pointing at is the role of class is not only about compliance, it's not only about, staying within the rules and regulations, but it's also a lot to, say, assist the owners and the different stakeholders in being abreast with new technologies. Looking at how they can comply not only with regulations that are enforced, but are also on the horizon to be implemented over the next few years. And as the many ship owners, ship managers have limited or to a lesser extent technical staff of their own, they are relying on classification societies to provide that competence. And I think DNV GL is at the forefront of giving advice in that respect.
Another big rule, another big regulation that obviously was enacted was the sulfur reduction through IMO from, I believe, 3% to 0.5% by 2020. Obviously, this was a rule that was expected, anticipated. Obviously, this is a rule that's going to have ramifications from the logistics of the fuel to the technical matters on board. Can you just shed some light about how you see the fuel switch coming, what DNV GL is doing in to help its customers prepare?
Yeah, so I think originally there was some debate whether this would come into force 2020 or 2025. It ended up with being 2020, so it pushes things forward. It's naturally good for the environment. It's another strain on the ship owners. So we are working, say, along different paths. So since 2001, we actually implemented rules for gas-fueled vessels, so using LNG as fuel. So this is naturally one area which will help ship owners become compliant with these new regulations. We have also produced notations being gas ready, which also helps the ship owners to, when they are ordering new vessels, to make the investments, the capex investments ready so that they don't need to fit the most expensive tanks at this point in time, but the vessels will be prepared for having those retrofitted at a later stage. So those are some aspects, and naturally we're working on scrubber technologies together with the manufacturers to help the manufacturers produce more reliable technologies, and these are, say, not just off-the-shelf products. So these are actually technologies that takes some effort into become reliable in the way that they are, say, practical to operate for the ship managers and owners. So these are some of the aspects. But I think the most significant contribution that we've made is probably on helping provide LNG as fuel, and that's also where we have the most experience, and we are the leading classification society in terms of market share for those vessels. And if I'm not wrong, as we speak, it is about 180 to 190 vessels either on the order book or in the sailing phase running on LNG as fuel.
But where are we on the path towards LNG in the next 5 years? What do you expect? How do you expect to see the growth trajectory on LNG as a fuel in the maritime sector?
Yeah, I think what we tried a few years ago was to give a prediction for 2020 in the uptake. I think at that time we were too optimistic on the uptake. We predicted around 1,000 vessels. I don't think we will see this uptake within that time frame. But I think what we have been seeing is that the infrastructure around providing LNG as fuel, the bunkering systems, the port facilities, is all developing in a positive manner. And we have also introduced what we term as the LNG Eye, which is an interactive map showing where are the existing facilities for bunkering, what are the planned facilities, what are the status, which vessels are operating where, etc. And I think this is for the industry a very useful tool in knowing where things are going and where you can actually plan. If you are trading in this area, you can rely on having LNG as fuel supplied. So yes, I think LNG as fuel has potential. It's extremely difficult to predict the numbers, and naturally a lot depends on the price of fuel and the availability of the low sulfur fuels going forward.
In adjusting to this new fuel, what do you see as the emerging solution, the emerging dominant solution to deal with the issue?
No, I think it's going to be a variety of different solutions. So we are maybe not so much predicting one solution, but we would think that we will see a bigger diversity on the fuel choices of the future, ranging from what we talked about, LNG, but also the low sulfur marine gas oils, to also hybrid solutions using batteries. So it's difficult to predict one way. It all depends a lot on where you are trading, what are your profiles. But in conclusion, I would say it's a bigger variety that we will see going forward. But it's also very interesting now with the battery technology moving fast. And I think what we will see is, if not as the sole source, but as an auxiliary energy supply to be able to shave some of the peak loads from, for instance, crane operations or other systems on board that require a peak load. And that makes you run the gensets at a more optimal load, which is also energy efficient.
When you look out your regulatory porthole, do you see anything on the horizon that will have as or significant magnitude?
Yeah, I'm sorry to sort of bring bad news, but there is no relief on the regulatory inflow. And I think what we have next is the CO2 emissions and the monetary reporting and verification scheme introduced both by the IMO and the EU. So this will be the next, point for the ship owners, managers to pay attention to. Now we are in the initial phases of reporting this. Then there will be other issues like black carbon. It could be, other things on the agenda that will come. So I think if you try to look at this from a bird view perspective, the inflow of regulations is going to be putting a more demanding framework on the ship managers and operators. And that will cause not only, financial constraints, but also challenge the professionalism of the operations in itself. So yeah, there is quite a bit coming on the regulatory side.
This is Greg Troutwine with Maritime Reporter TV. And again, we thank Knut for sharing his time and his insights with us.